My name is Hannah Miller. I am 29, and 2 weeks before Thanksgiving last year, my brother sent me a text that split my world open. "You're not invited to Thanksgiving this year. Mom and Dad agree. Don't make it harder." I read it twice, my coffee cooling in front of me, the words blurring as my pulse roared in my ears. Not invited. Mom and Dad agree. Don't make it harder. It felt like a sentence, like I had been tried and found guilty in a court I never knew existed. My hands shook as I called Ryan. Voicemail. I called Mom. She picked up after several rings, her voice fake, bright, brittle. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this a joke?" "No," she said flatly. "It's better this way. We want peace this year." Peace. As if my presence was a war. As if the absence of me would make them whole. I asked why. She didn't answer. She just said it again, slower, like a final nail in the coffin. "It's better this way." Then she hung up. I sat there, frozen, people passing outside the cafe window, carrying grocery bags, laughing into phones, all while my family was cutting me out like I was a stranger. Anger began to replace the shock. This couldn't just be about the argument Ryan and I had over money, or the fact I had refused to help promote his business. This felt calculated, like they were hiding something. My phone lit up again, vibrating across the table. "Claire! My sister-in-law never called me." I answered, my voice tight. "Hannah," she said, and I could hear the tears. "I can't keep this secret from you anymore." My grip tightened on the phone. "What secret?" She hesitated, her breath uneven, like she was weighing the cost of speaking. "There's a reason you weren't invited," she said finally, "and it has nothing to do with peace. It's about what Ryan did and what your parents are helping him cover up." My chest tightened. What did he do? Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the words hit like a blow. "I can't say over the phone. You need to see it for yourself, but you need to know this before you walk into whatever trap they've set." A trap. The word jolted through me. My mind spun. This wasn't just a cruel family slight. This was something bigger, uglier, dangerous even. Claire's voice cracked as she added, "If you hear nothing else from me, hear this. Don't let them make you the villain. You're not. They are." I stared out at the cold Boston street, my reflection ghosted in the glass, knowing whatever I was about to uncover would burn away whatever was left of family loyalty, and there'd be no going back. Growing up in the Miller household was like living on a stage where every role had already been cast, and mine was to be the quiet, accommodating daughter who never took up too much space or challenged the narrative my parents spun about our perfect family. Ryan, my older brother by 4 years, was the golden child from the start, praised for every achievement, excused for every mistake, and held up as the example I could never quite match no matter how hard I tried. Family dinners were less about connection and more about rehearsed performances for neighbors or relatives, with Mom smiling tightly and Dad controlling the conversation so no one could stray into territory that might make us look less than perfect. When I was a kid, I thought this was normal, that every family had unspoken rules about which topics were safe and which were forbidden. But as I got older, I realized it was just control, subtle, constant, and suffocating. Ryan learned early how to weaponize it, using charm to win over adults while quietly undermining me when no one was looking. And if I ever protested, Mom would call me oversensitive or say I was imagining things, and Dad would tell me to be more like your brother, as if that was the solution to every problem. Holidays were the worst, because that was when the performance was most elaborate. Matching outfits, carefully arranged seating, and a script of compliments and toasts, where Ryan's successes were celebrated and mine were either ignored or reframed to somehow reflect well on him. After college, I moved to Boston to put some distance between us, thinking that if I wasn't in their daily orbit, I could start to breathe. But I still drove back for major holidays, partly out of obligation, partly because some small part of me still hoped they'd notice I was worth more than a polite smile across the table. The truth is, every Thanksgiving I came home to the same dynamic: Ryan holding court in the living room, telling stories that placed him as the hero and me as the butt of the joke. Mom laughing along, Dad nodding in approval, and me forcing a smile while gripping my wine glass too tightly. The tension between Ryan and me had been building quietly for years. especially after he started his own business, and my parents expected me to use my marketing contacts to help him for free. Something I refused after realizing he was using family as unpaid labor while pocketing all the profits. That refusal marked me in their eyes as uncooperative, maybe even disloyal, and from then on, subtle digs turned into open criticism. Mom would ask why I couldn't be more supportive. Dad would tell me family comes first, but always in a way that meant Ryan first, everyone else second, and Ryan. Ryan just smirked like he knew they'd always side with him no matter what. Claire, his wife, was always polite to me, but kept her distance, almost like she was afraid to get too close. And I assumed it was because she had bought into their narrative that I was difficult. Still, she never joined in the cruelty, and I took that as the only sliver of kindness in a house where kindness was rationed. Looking back now, I see that what I thought was distance was actually self-preservation, and maybe she already knew things things she couldn't say without blowing up her life. But at the time, I was just the sister who lived in the city visited for holidays and tried not to let their comments stick too deep. I didn't know then that all those years of being sidelined were setting the stage for the moment when they would cut me out entirely, and that when it happened, it would be under the guise of family peace while hiding something far darker beneath. It was late October when the first sign of trouble slipped quietly into my inbox, a group email from Mom with the subject line, "Thanksgiving plans, cheerful and light on the surface, but loaded with the usual undertones of control." She detailed the schedule down to the minute, who would bring what, where everyone would sit. Even the color scheme for the table setting, burnt orange and cream this year, because it photographed well, she said, and at the very end, almost as an afterthought, she wrote that Ryan had suggested we keep the gathering small this time. Just immediate family, to make it easier on everyone, which might have sounded harmless if I hadn't noticed my name missing from the attached guest list. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she'd forgotten to type it in, but when I replied, asking about it, her response came quickly and cold. "Oh, honey, Ryan just thought it might be better for you to take a break this year. Less stress for everyone, you understand?" Followed by a smiley face that somehow felt like a slap. I stared at the screen for a long time, my pulse climbing, replaying every interaction over the past few months, trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve being quietly cut out. And the only thing I could think of was that last phone call with Ryan when I told him I couldn't design his company's holiday campaign for free. I had hung up on him after he called me selfish, and maybe this was his payback. I called Mom immediately, but she didn't answer, so I tried Dad, who picked up on the third ring with a sigh, and told me it wasn't personal, that Ryan just wanted a more harmonious dinner this year, and I should respect that. Respect that as in accept being excluded from my own family's table without a fight. I wanted to scream, but instead I hung up and paced my apartment, my stomach twisting. Part of me wanted to show up anyway, walk right in and make them look me in the eye when they tried to turn me away, but another part knew they'd just spin it into me being dramatic, proving them right. I was still stewing when Claire's number lit up my phone 3 days later, something that almost never happened. When I answered, her voice was shaky, like she was holding back tears, and she asked if I could talk somewhere private. I sat down, heart pounding, because whatever she was about to say felt like it was going to matter. She apologized for calling out of the blue, then said she couldn't stay quiet anymore. Not after what she'd overheard Ryan had told my parents, that inviting me would ruin the mood because I had a habit of making things about myself, and Mom had agreed, saying it was better to nip it in the bud. Claire said she had been biting her tongue for years, but this time it crossed a line because she'd seen how much it hurt me, and she hated the way they talked about me like I was some stranger they barely tolerated. I asked her why she was telling me this now, and she hesitated before admitting there was something I needed to know about Ryan. Something that would make their sudden desire to exclude me look less like family politics and more like fear of exposure. Before she could go further, she said she couldn't risk speaking on the phone, not with Ryan around, but if I was willing to meet her in person, she'd tell me everything. My mind was racing, torn between suspicion and curiosity. But deep down, I knew I would go because whatever was happening had been building for years, and this might finally be the crack that let the truth out. 2 days later, I was sitting in my car outside the little cafe on Maple Street, the one with the chipped blue door and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls that used to make me think of home. Before home became a place I had to brace myself for, and I could see Claire already inside at a corner table, her hands wrapped tight around a mug of coffee, like she was holding on for warmth or maybe courage. Her eyes darting to the door every few seconds until she spotted me. She waved me over and I slid into the seat across from her, my chest tight with anticipation, and before I could even take off my coat, she leaned in and said she couldn't stay long because Ryan thought she was running errands, and he had a way of keeping track of her which sent a chill through me because it sounded less like a husband being curious and more like a man who didn't trust his wife. She lowered her voice and told me that at the last family barbecue, she'd walked in on Ryan and Mom talking in the kitchen and they didn't realize she was there. Ryan had been saying how I'd been digging into things that didn't concern me, that I had a way of asking questions that made people nervous, and Mom had laughed and said it was in my nature to stir the pot, so the best way to handle me was to keep me out of anything important. Claire said it wasn't just about Thanksgiving, it was about the fact that I had unknowingly stumbled into something Ryan didn't want me to know, and my exclusion was a way to make sure I couldn't connect the dots. I felt my mouth go dry and asked her what exactly she meant, and she told me she'd overheard Ryan talking about shifting some numbers around in the family trust, something about a transfer that wouldn't look good if the wrong eyes saw it. My heart dropped because the family trust was supposed to be untouchable. A safety net my grandparents had set up, and if Ryan was messing with it, it meant he was either stealing or covering something up. Claire said she didn't have proof, but she knew enough to make him nervous, and that was why he was suddenly so invested in controlling the guest list. I sat there trying to process my mind, flipping through every interaction with him in the past year, remembering the smug way he dismissed my questions about Dad's business finances and the way Mom always jumped to defend him. The anger was starting to burn hotter than the hurt now, and I told Claire I wasn't going to let them do this. That if Ryan thought keeping me away from Thanksgiving would shut me up, he didn't know me at all. She grabbed my wrist and told me to be careful because Ryan played dirty that he had a talent for making people look unstable, and if I confronted him without proof, he'd turn it around on me. Her warning only made me more determined because now it wasn't just about being left out of a holiday. It was about the fact that my own brother was willing to rewrite the family narrative and erase me from it if it meant protecting himself. When I left the cafe, the autumn air felt sharper, the sky lower, and as I walked back to my car, I could almost hear Dad's voice in my head telling me to let it go, to stop chasing storms. But I knew this storm had already found me, and if I didn't face it head on, it would swallow me whole. That week, the phone calls started not from Mom or Dad, but from Aunt Marlene, from Cousin Jeff, from people I barely spoke to during the year, suddenly calling with the same syrupy tone, asking how I was doing. Then slipping in a line about how maybe it would be good for me to have a quiet holiday this year. How sometimes family gatherings can be too much for certain personalities, their voices dripping with that kind of fake concern. That's just polite cover for delivering someone else's message. It was obvious Ryan and Mom had been working the phones, planting the narrative that I was the one who made things tense, that I was the one who caused scenes, and the more they repeated it to other people, the more it became a kind of unofficial truth in the family's collective memory. I found out from Jeff, who didn't realize he was telling on himself, that Mom had actually said she worried I might pick a fight at the table, which was absurd because I had never started a fight in my life, though I had refused to sit quietly when someone crossed a line, and apparently that was enough to earn me the label of troublemaker. Claire texted me one night saying Ryan had been joking about how I'd probably show up anyway, just to make a scene so he'd have a reason to kick me out. And that Mom laughed and said maybe that would be good. Get it on video for proof. The sheer pettiness of it made my hands shake, but under the anger was something heavier, realizing they were setting the stage to gaslight me if I tried to defend myself. At work, I found myself checking my phone constantly, half expecting another little dig to arrive in my messages, and sure enough, they came in waves, sometimes subtle, like Dad texting a photo of the seating chart with my name missing, followed by Hope. You understand, honey, and sometimes blatant, like Mom, emailing me a recipe for pumpkin pie with a note that said, in case you want to make your own this year, which was just another way of saying I wouldn't be having hers. It was like they wanted me to feel every inch of the exclusion, to sit in it, until I either broke down or lashed out so they could point and say, see, she's unstable. I remembered Claire's warning that Ryan played dirty, and it clicked that this was the opening act of whatever performance he had in mind. Death by 1,000 small humiliations until I was too exhausted to ask questions about the trust or anything else. I stopped answering most calls, which only made them push harder. Dad leaving voicemails about how I shouldn't make this harder than it has to be, and Mom chiming in with, "You know we love you, but sometimes love means doing what's best for everyone." A line so rehearsed I could picture her practicing it in the mirror. Even my mailbox wasn't safe one afternoon. I found a printed family photo from last Thanksgiving in an envelope with no note, just the image of everyone smiling around the table. Me cropped out so seamlessly you'd think I'd never been there. I sat at my kitchen counter staring at it, feeling that old familiar mix of rage and grief twisting in my chest. But instead of crying, I took a deep breath and pinned it to my bulletin board as a reminder not of my absence, but of what they were willing to do to erase me. Because if Ryan thought he could control the narrative this year, he hadn't counted on the fact that I was already writing my own. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving when the blow finally landed, not physically, but with the same crushing force an email from Mom with the subject line. Final arrangements that laid out every detail of the holiday schedule like it was a wedding itinerary, complete with meal times, assigned seating, and even a dress code. But the part that made my pulse pound was the guest list at the bottom, names neatly typed in alphabetical order with mine. Missing, like a ghost in my own family, and under it in parentheses in bold was the line, "This list is final. Please respect our wishes," as if daring me to challenge it. I stared at the screen, my stomach turning, and before I could even process the insult, my phone rang. It was Claire, her voice shaking as she told me she had just overheard Ryan bragging to one of his friends that I'd been handled and that this year would be drama-free, without me there to make Mom cry. And then he laughed in that smug, lazy way of his, the sound that had grated on me since we were kids. Claire said she had tried to push back to say excluding me was cruel, but Ryan snapped that she should stay in her lane and that the family had already agreed this was best. My chest felt tight, but what made it worse was hearing Claire's voice break when she said, "I'm sorry, I should have fought harder because she was the only one who'd tried at all." Fueled by a mix of fury and disbelief, I called Mom, and when she picked up, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I asked her straight out why my name wasn't on the list, and she sighed like I was a child, throwing a tantrum, saying, "Honey, this isn't about you, it's about keeping the peace." And when I pressed asking peace from what exactly, she lowered her voice and said, "Ryan's been under so much stress, you know how he gets. Like his temper was some natural disaster. We all had to plan around, like my absence was a sandbag against the flood." I told her this was ridiculous, that I wasn't going to cause trouble, and she cut me off with, "I don't want to argue. You're not invited," end of discussion, and then she hung up the click in my ear, as final as a door slamming. I stood there gripping my phone, heart hammering, when a text buzzed through from Ryan, 4 words. "Not your year, sis," followed by a winking emoji, the kind of taunt that made my vision go white around the edges. I wanted to drive over there to stand in their kitchen and demand an explanation, but I knew walking into that house would be stepping onto his stage, playing the part he'd already written for me, the unhinged sister who couldn't let things go. Instead, I paced my apartment, every nerve in my body screaming for action, and that's when Claire called again this time, whispering like she was hiding in a closet, saying she'd just seen a copy of a document Ryan had left out. Something about asset division and contingency plans with Dad's and Mom's names on it. My name missing again, like I'd already been written out of more than just dinner. She didn't have time to take a photo before Ryan came back into the room, but her voice was trembling when she said, "I think this is bigger than Thanksgiving," and that sentence lodged in my mind like a hook pulling me toward a truth I hadn't been ready to see. That the table they were pushing me away from wasn't just about turkey and pie. It was about power money and my place in the family, and Ryan was making sure I didn't have one. That night, I sat in the dim light of my living room, the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the only sound my mind running loops of every conversation, every side glance from Ryan over the years, every time Mom had told me to just be the bigger person while he got away with whatever cruelty he felt like dishing out, and the weight of it all pressed so heavily on my chest I could barely breathe. I had always known our family wasn't warm, but I had clung to the idea that at least blood meant some kind of line they wouldn't cross yet. Here I was, watching them cut me out with the precision of a surgeon removing something unwanted. I tried to distract myself scrolling through photos from past Thanksgivings on my phone, but instead of nostalgia, each picture felt like a lie. Me smiling at the table while under the surface I was bracing for the next jab from Ryan or the next comment from Mom about how I should be more accommodating, more like my brother, less confrontational. I thought about calling Claire again, but I didn't want to put her in the position of having to sneak around her own husband, so I poured a glass of wine instead, staring at the deep red swirl, like maybe it held some answer. By midnight, the anger had dulled into something colder, heavier, the kind of tired that sinks into your bones, and that's when the doubt crept in. Maybe this was my fault. Maybe I had been too outspoken, too unwilling to let things slide. Maybe they were right that I brought drama. I hated that part of me believed it, but years of being told you're the problem can make you start to see yourself through their warped lens. I woke the next morning still in yesterday's clothes, my phone buzzing with a new group chat notification from Thanksgiving 2023, which I wasn't part of the preview, showing a string of messages about menu changes and seating plans, and I couldn't help but imagine them all laughing together, united in the relief of my absence. The isolation was suffocating, like I was locked outside a house I'd once lived in, looking through the windows at a life that no longer had space for me. Work that day was a blur, my concentration shot, and even my coworkers noticed, asking if I was okay. But I brushed it off, saying I just hadn't slept well, because how do you explain to people that your own family has decided you're disposable? That evening, I forced myself to clean my apartment, scrubbing countertops and rearranging shelves, trying to reclaim some sense of control. But the silence was deafening, every empty corner echoing with the thought that I was alone. The pain wasn't just emotional, it sat in my body, a knot in my stomach, a tension in my shoulders that wouldn't release, and when I finally lay down in bed, I realized I hadn't eaten all day, my appetite gone. In that quiet, I admitted something I hadn't wanted to face, that this wasn't just about a dinner invitation. This was about years of erasure, about being told in 1,000 small ways that I didn't matter as much, that I wasn't worth the same effort or care as Ryan, and the wound of that truth was far deeper than any single holiday could account for. But even as I felt that raw hurt, a small ember inside me refused to go out, a flicker of defiance that whispered, maybe they had underestimated me. Maybe they had forgotten that I wasn't someone who stayed down forever. And that thought, faint as it was, kept me from completely breaking. 2 days later, while I was still wrestling with whether to just delete every family contact from my phone, Claire called me again, her voice low and hurried, saying she only had a few minutes before Ryan came back from running errands. And what she told me in that short time shifted everything. She had overheard a conversation between Ryan and Mom while she was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, and they weren't just talking about Thanksgiving, they were talking about me like I was some problem to be handled. Ryan saying, once she's out of the picture, we can finally get Dad's property sorted without her sticking her nose in, and Mom agreeing, saying it was better this way and that I was too stubborn to see reason. Claire whispered that she thought they might be planning to push me out of more than just the holiday, and that she had seen some paperwork on the dining table the other night that looked like legal documents, though she couldn't get close enough to read them without raising suspicion. My pulse hammered in my ears, the words settling like ice in my veins, because suddenly the Thanksgiving snub wasn't about petty family drama. It was a calculated move to isolate me, weaken my position, and probably maneuver me out of whatever inheritance or rights I still had connected to our parents' estate. I asked Claire if she could get a picture of those papers, and she hesitated, saying she would try. But Ryan had been more controlling lately, checking her phone, making sure she didn't spend too long away from him. Still, she promised to be careful, and after we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, the dots connecting in my mind, Mom's sudden coldness, Ryan's fake concern when Dad's health had started to decline, the way they had been overly eager to take over handling family business without keeping me in the loop. I realized then that every time I'd been told to just keep the peace, it wasn't about avoiding conflict, it was about keeping me uninformed and out of the way. That night, I pulled out a box of old papers from my closet, digging through past letters from my father, old mortgage documents, even tax statements, trying to piece together what they might be after, and in the middle of it, I found an envelope I didn't recognize postmarked just a month ago addressed to me, but sent to my old address, which meant someone had deliberately kept it from me. Inside was a notice about a family trust meeting I had apparently missed, which made my stomach drop, because now it was clear this wasn't paranoia. This was a coordinated effort to shut me out legally. I scanned the notice into my laptop, backed it up on a cloud drive, and made a list of everything I knew so far. Dates, comments, and now this document because I wasn't going to let them rewrite the truth. By morning, I had decided I needed to see those papers on Ryan's table for myself, and while I couldn't just walk into his house, I knew Claire might be able to lure him out long enough for me to stop by under some pretense. I texted her my idea in code, careful not to say too much in case he checked her phone, and she sent back a single thumbs-up emoji. For the first time since this started, the fog of helplessness began to lift, replaced by a sharp, steady focus. If they wanted me gone, they were going to have to work a lot harder because I was about to find out exactly what they were hiding, and once I did, they wouldn't see me coming. The opportunity came faster than I expected when Claire called early on Saturday morning, her voice a mix of nerves and determination, telling me Ryan had decided to take the kids to the park for a few hours to give her time to clean before guests arrived for a barbecue that evening. And she said if I wanted to see the documents, now was my chance. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and a small portable scanner I'd borrowed from a coworker, my heart pounding as I drove to their house, rehearsing what I would say if anyone questioned me. But when I got there, Claire ushered me in, quickly locking the door behind us, and whispered that the papers were still on the dining table under a stack of magazines. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled them out, my eyes scanning the headers, petition to remove me as a beneficiary from our father's trust, request to sell a portion of the family land without my consent, and even a notarized statement signed by Mom and Ryan, claiming I had verbally forfeited my share during a past conversation, which was a complete fabrication. My chest tightened rage, burning through the shock, but I forced myself to breathe evenly, photographing every page, then scanning them to the encrypted folder I'd prepared on my cloud account. Claire hovered nearby, glancing nervously at the window, asking how bad it was, and when I told her, her face went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table as she whispered, "I knew it was something, but this is theft." Before I could answer, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside Ryan's truck pulling into the driveway much earlier than planned, and panic spiked in my chest. Claire hurried to shove the papers back under the magazines, while I slipped my scanner into my bag, and seconds later the front door swung open and Ryan's voice called out, "Claire, why's her car here?" He stepped into the dining room, eyes flicking from me to the table, suspicion hardening his features, and he asked me directly what I was doing there. I smiled tightly and said I'd just stopped by to drop off some old family photos for Claire to sort through, holding up an empty envelope as if that were proof. But his gaze lingered on my bag, and I could tell he was debating whether to push the issue. Claire, bless her, stepped in, then snapping that he was being paranoid, and that he was going to scare the kids with his tone. And after a tense moment, he muttered something about needing to talk later, and stalked off toward the garage. The moment he was out of earshot, I mouthed thank you to her, and we agreed I'd leave immediately before he came back. My hands were still shaking when I got into my car, but the fear was now mixed with something sharper, a cold, clean resolve, because I had exactly what I needed to expose them. I drove straight to a friend's place across town, someone I trusted completely, and together we reviewed the scans, confirming every signature, every date, noting inconsistencies. Like the fact that one notary stamp didn't match the official registry for that date, which meant there was likely forgery involved. My friend, who had some connections in the legal field, advised me to take the evidence to an attorney specializing in estate disputes, and by Monday morning, I was sitting in a wood-paneled office while a sharp-eyed lawyer flipped through the pages, her eyebrows lifting higher with each one. She told me bluntly that not only did I have grounds to challenge their actions, but that what they had done could constitute criminal fraud. Hearing that was like a switch flipping inside me. The weeks of humiliation, exclusion, and manipulation crystallized into a single fierce thought. I was going to take this fight as far as it needed to go, and I wasn't going to warn them first, because the element of surprise was now my greatest weapon. As I left the office with a signed agreement for representation in my hand, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my step. Not because the battle was won, but because for the first time in this whole ordeal, I was the one holding the power, and soon they were going to realize just how badly they had underestimated me. The barbecue at Ryan's house the following weekend was my stage, though no one else knew it yet, and I spent the days leading up to it coordinating with my attorney gathering, not just the forged documents, but also bank records showing suspicious withdrawals text messages, where Mom and Ryan openly discussed keeping her out of the picture, and even a short audio clip Claire had managed to record one night when Ryan bragged about how easy it would be to sell the land once the paperwork was taken care of. My lawyer advised that while we would file the official case on Monday, there was nothing stopping me from confronting them beforehand, as long as I didn't reveal anything that could compromise the legal process. So I planned a confrontation that would humiliate them publicly, but still leave them guessing about how much I truly knew. I arrived at the barbecue wearing a bright red dress, a deliberate choice to stand out against the sea of muted backyard colors, and I brought a large envelope under my arm. Not the real documents, but carefully prepared copies and a few innocuous photos on top to act as a decoy. Ryan greeted me with forced politeness, clearly still uneasy from our last encounter, while Mom's smile was brittle, her eyes darting to the envelope. The yard was full of family friends, neighbors, and distant relatives, all chatting over grilled burgers and beer, and I made sure to mingle waiting for the perfect moment when enough people were close enough to hear. It came just as Ryan was making a toast about family unity, his arm around Mom's shoulders, the kind of sugary lie that made my stomach turn. And when he finished, I stepped forward, smiling sweetly, and said I wanted to share something too. I pulled the envelope into view, and in a voice loud enough to carry across the yard, I said, I came across some fascinating documents this week, and they paint a very different picture of this family, one that I think everyone here deserves to know. I could see Mom's smile falter, Ryan's face tightening, but I kept talking, flipping the envelope open and pulling out a single photocopied page, one of the petitions to remove me from Dad's trust, and holding it up just long enough for the nearby guests to see the bold header. Whispers rippled instantly, people leaning toward each other, and Ryan barked, "That's private family business." But I tilted my head and replied, "Private maybe, illegal. Almost definitely." The tension was thick, every eye on us, and I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice just enough to force people to lean in, and said, "What would you all think if you learned that someone here was forging signatures and lying to steal from their own blood?" Gasps broke out, and I watched Ryan's jaw clench his hand, twitching as if he wanted to snatch the papers away, but I held them firm, smiling like a cat that had cornered its prey. Mom tried to laugh it off, saying I'd misunderstood some legal housekeeping, but I cut her off, my voice sharpening as I said, "Housekeeping doesn't require fake notary stamps, Mom." The words hit like a slap, and for a moment there was complete silence, except for the sound of the wind rattling the plastic cups on the picnic table. Then someone in the crowd muttered, "That's serious," and another asked outright if I was going to the police. I straightened up, slipped the papers back into the envelope, and said, "Let's just say, by Monday morning, the right people will have everything they need." Ryan's face flushed deep red, his mouth opening and closing without sound, and Mom's hands were gripping her wine glass so tightly I half expected it to shatter. I let the silence hang for a few beats, then turned and walked away deliberately, leaving them standing there under the weight of every curious stare and whispered question, knowing that in less than 48 hours their entire scheme would be in the hands of people who could destroy them. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming every piece of power they had tried to strip from me and making sure they could never do it to anyone else again. By Monday morning, the quiet hum of my lawyer's office was replaced by the sharp clicks of a police officer's pen as he took my formal statement, each page of evidence carefully cataloged and signed. The bank records, the forged trust documents, and the audio clip Claire had recorded all laid out in a neat row on the polished desk, like pieces of a puzzle that when assembled painted an unmistakable picture of calculated theft and fraud. My attorney had already filed the civil suit, but the weight of the criminal charges meant Ryan and Mom wouldn't just be facing financial consequences, they could be looking at actual prison time. I didn't have to wait long to see the first ripple hit because that same afternoon, two unmarked police cars pulled into Ryan's driveway, officers in plain clothes walking briskly up the path, while neighbors peeked through curtains their curiosity barely contained. Claire texted me from the kitchen window 3 words. "It's happening now," followed by a blurry photo of Ryan on the porch, arms stiff at his sides, face pale as one officer handed him a folded sheet of paper and another began reading his rights. Mom appeared moments later, her mouth moving in frantic bursts, but the officer barely looked at her, instead gesturing for her to step aside as they moved into the house. Within an hour, they emerged with boxes of files, Ryan's laptop, and a small fireproof safe. I recognized instantly as Dad's one. Mom had sworn years ago was lost in the move. The arrest wasn't immediate. They were being brought in for questioning first, but the visual damage was already done. The image of them standing on that porch, caught between fury and fear, now burned into the memories of every neighbor and family friend who happened to be within sight. By the evening, the phone calls started cousins, old friends, even a few of Mom's bridge partners, each one fishing for confirmation, their voices dripping with a mix of shock and morbid fascination. I didn't give details, only saying, the truth has a way of catching up, which I knew would spread faster than any detailed explanation. The fallout was swift. Ryan's contracting business saw 2 major clients pull their contracts within 48 hours, citing integrity concerns, and Mom's carefully cultivated social circle began shrinking overnight as invitations dried up and calls went unanswered. It was more than social exile, though financial reality began to crush them quickly. The court issued a freeze on certain accounts pending investigation, leaving them scrambling to cover even basic expenses, and the property they'd planned to sell for a windfall was now tied up in legal limbo, the title under scrutiny and the transfer halted. Claire told me that behind closed doors, Ryan was seething, blaming Mom for getting sloppy and letting the evidence slip, while Mom accused Ryan of running his mouth too much. Their alliance, once so tightly bound by greed, was unraveling thread by thread, each accusation fraying the edges until there was nothing left but mutual resentment. I didn't gloat publicly, but I made sure the right people knew I wasn't backing down when a local paper called asking if I wanted to comment for a story about a family trust dispute. I gave them a carefully worded statement about protecting one's rights and the importance of standing up to financial exploitation, letting the implication hang without naming names. Still, everyone in our town knew exactly who it was about. The beauty of it was that I didn't have to destroy them myself. Their own actions had done that perfectly well. All I had done was shine a light, and as I watched from a distance, I realized the true satisfaction wasn't just in seeing them suffer consequences, but in the quiet knowledge that they had underestimated me so completely, so arrogantly, that they never saw this coming until it was too late. The first Thanksgiving after everything fell apart was quiet, almost eerily so, and yet it was the most peaceful holiday I could remember in years. Claire and I cooked together in my small but warm kitchen, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon sweet pies filling the air as the late autumn light streamed through the windows. There was no shouting, no cold silences, no walking on eggshells, just the soft clatter of dishes, laughter over a shared glass of wine, and the occasional hum of the old record player in the corner. It struck me then how much energy I had wasted in past years trying to force myself into a family that had no real space for me, a place where love was conditional and loyalty meant compliance, and how different it felt now to be surrounded only by people who wanted me there without strings attached. My phone buzzed once with an unknown number, and when I let it go to voicemail, the message was short, Mom's voice tight and brittle, saying something about talking things through and putting the past behind us. I deleted it without listening to the rest because I had no intention of stepping back into the cycle that had nearly broken me. Justice, I'd learned, isn't always about courtrooms and verdicts. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to take, about refusing to give them another chance to write your story for you. Ryan and Mom's cases were still winding their way through the system with court dates looming and their reputations already in tatters. And though some distant relatives whispered about family forgiveness, I didn't owe them anything. Not after the years of gaslighting, manipulation, and outright cruelty. Instead, I focused on building something new, something that didn't revolve around proving my worth to people who thrived on diminishing it. Claire and I started a small catering business, turning our shared love of food into something that not only paid the bills, but brought us into contact with kind, supportive people who valued our work. Every time I handed over a plate of carefully prepared food, I thought about how different my life felt now, how light it was without the constant weight of their judgment pressing down. The world didn't end because I cut ties, it expanded, and in that space I found joy. I didn't even realize I'd been missing. If there's anything my story should tell someone in the same place I was, it's that you are not obligated to keep toxic people in your life just because they share your blood. You are allowed to choose peace over chaos, and you are allowed to let their consequences be theirs alone. As the night wound down and the last slice of pie disappeared from the table, I leaned back in my chair, the warmth from the fire in the hearth making me drowsy, and felt an unshakable certainty settle in my chest. I had walked away, I had fought back, and I had won. Not in a way that needed applause or grand gestures, but in the quiet, undeniable way that comes from knowing you will never let them break you again.